let's start at the beginning. I did my BSc Honors Mathematics from St. Stephen's College. Don't ask me why BSc Mathematics. Those were the days when, the children used to listen to their parents. Parents said that it would be a good thing if you did mathematics, and then, science was always something that all good children were supposed to do. So BSc Mathematics. 3 years I did. So my years in college, I remember less for mathematics, but more for the extracurricular activity. I was the captain of the women's judo team at St. Stephen's College. And so when I think back of college, I don't think of the classes. I think of the dojo, where we used to spend time after our classes. After my college, I did my MBA from Faculty of Management Studies in Delhi University. And after that, I was one of the 5 other people who were selected All India for a service called the Tata Administrative Service. It's called TAS or TAS now. Back then, it used to be a very elite service. And even though I say it myself, and it may sound boastful, but it was a job that was coveted by everybody on campus. And we were only 6 of us who were selected All India for the TAS. And I spent the next 13 years with the Tatas as part of the TAS. It is a group cadre where the TAS officers are groomed to become future leaders of the group. And I consider myself extremely fortunate that I joined the TAS and that I started my career with the Tata Group, because the one lesson that I learned during those 13 years has stayed with me throughout, no matter what I did after. And that was that there is only one way to do business, and that is the right way. It wasn't any classroom training that we got, it wasn't any lectures that we got, but it was just the ethos of the group. And I really consider myself fortunate that my grounding in business was with the Tatas. After 13 years, I got an opportunity to look at options outside the group, and I kind of wandered into banking. I became one of the first few private bankers in India with a boutique firm called ING Bearings Private Banking. And then, for the next 14 or 15 years, I was a banker, and then I became a consumer banker. After ING, I went to a bank called UTI Bank, which is now called Axis Bank. And I spent 6 years there. And by the time I left Axis Bank, I was president retail banking, looking after heading the entire consumer banking part of the bank. And spent 2 years, 1.5 years with Yes Bank as group president, branch banking. And after which I went back to the Tatas for 2 years, because those were the years when the Tatas wanted to be a bank, but sadly they changed their mind. And that gave me an opportunity to think about what I wanted to do. And I decided to give myself a gap year. You youngsters keep talking of gap years. And in my rather middling to old age, I said, let me give myself a gap year. And during that gap year, I realized one thing, that after having worked for almost 30 years in the corporate world, I did not find any excitement nor joy in thinking about, the same old drudgery, getting up and going to the office and going through, whatever office had to offer. And so I decided that I would venture out on my own. Family businesses have always been an area of interest ever since I became a private banker, which was in the year 2000. And in family businesses, when I talk about family businesses, most people assume that I look at the business side or the investment side, but I don't. I work with family businesses on the family side, because in every family, what happens in family has far-reaching effects outside the immediate home. But in family businesses, whatever happens within the family has a direct impact on the business. So any disharmony in the family has an adverse effect on the business. Any lack of preparedness in the family to handle, say, a new CEO in the business or to handle a new investor in the business, again has a negative impact on the business. Now, unfortunately, what happens is that as a consultant, as lawyers, as bankers, whenever we deal with family businesses, we never talk about the family. We always focus on the business, and there cannot be a family business which is successful unless there has been a focus on the family. So just like most businesses, including family businesses, have a strategy for their business. Similarly, you need to have a strategy for your family. And I now work with families to help them understand issues that they need to address in their families if they want to build a multi-generational business. So in my own venture, which very creatively I call it Families and Business Fab, like my creative hat really came on very strong. So as part of Fab, I bring out a magazine which addresses the concerns of family business owners, entrepreneurs, promoters. I write books. I've written 2 books for Penguin, which are on family businesses. I speak at forums. I talk to people. I write for newspapers. And that's what I do for family business. And I also consult with family businesses, but that I do very selectively because it takes a lot of time and commitment on both sides, the family as well as me. And sometimes I find that the families say that they want somebody to come and help them sort out problems, but they're not ready. So therefore it takes commitment from both sides. I am an independent director on the boards of some very well-known and reputed domestic and multinational companies. And this is what keeps me busy. And talking to people like you is always a pleasure. I think this year, 2020, the year of the pandemic, has been an eye-opener for a lot of family businesses. One, it's given a chance for the families to spend time together. Typically, in family businesses, while the fathers and sons may work together, they may even stay together, but they don't really spend that quality time together. And in the first set of the lockdowns, from say March till June, when the lockdown was really severe, people couldn't get out of the house. Families had no option but to stay together. And after a point, how much of Netflix can you watch? How much of, screen time can you have? You had to spend time together. You had to spend time talking to each other. And again, I have anecdotal data, but I do believe that the communication between various family members has become much better. There have been all those undercurrents that may have been flowing. There have been some baggages. I think people got a chance to clear out the communication pipes, which bodes well for family businesses, because the lack of communication is one main reason why there is conflict in family businesses between family members. Lack of communication, it starts off with small things, and it's usually lack of proper communication. So when those communication pipelines got really cleaned out, and hopefully the communication will flow easier and clearer and faster between various family members. 2, succession planning would have also been discussed, because patriarchs, family business owners, some of the smartest people that I know, but they all believe that they are immortal, or they used to believe that they are immortal. keep, don't want to talk of death, don't want to talk of wills, don't want to talk of succession, because yeah, it would happen, but maybe it won't happen to me. I mean, that was the overriding thought in everybody's mind. But the pandemic actually made them look at their own mortality upfront, because no matter how rich you were, no matter how powerful you were, no matter how safely you were ensconced in your little home, the pandemic could come and get you anytime it wanted. So the patriarchs actually looked at mortality, and therefore they proactively started talking about succession and succession planning. And when you put these two together, that people were actually talking about life after me for the business, along with the fact that communication pipelines got cleaned and they were clear, this is going to bode well for family businesses in the coming years. The digitization of businesses is going to help. It's going to help businesses. It's going to, of course, take away a lot of jobs as well, because people have found that a lot of jobs can be automated or they can be outsourced. But the good thing is that people who wanted to work but could not work full time will find it much easier to do the work from home or whichever part of the world that they may be sitting in. So if I wanted to work in a call center, for example, I had to be in one of the centers where there were these large call centers. But I'm sure technology has now enabled people to work from any part of India. All you need is connectivity. So, so geography has ceased to be a constraint, and also gender has ceased to be a constraint, because work from home or work from a location of your choice is going to benefit women the most. I started working in 1987, and at that time there weren't these opportunities. I mean, if I think that I went to my parents and I said I want to become a chef, they would have fallen off in horror. Today, I know so many youngsters. I know people that I know, daughters and sons of friends and relatives who are pursuing a career in culinary, and it is really, really good. So you guys are actually quite fortunate. I mean, it's a good time to be young. Again, without being boastful or anything like that, I do think that in every generation, there are people who make it easier for the generations that follow them. And I was able to go out and work because there were women ahead of me who went out and, did whatever they did. There were very few, admittedly, but they were there. We were a little more in number, but nowhere compared to the number of women who are, wanting to make a career. And I speak with specific reference to the corporate world. There are far more women wanting to make a career in the corporate world than we had when I was in MBA. The women have evolved far more than the men. The poor men actually are going through a huge identity crisis because, and I'm talking with specific reference to Indian men right now, though it is true for men all over. But in India especially, the men have been brought up to say that you are the kings of the world and the world revolves around you. And, if you want a glass of water, there are always, 3 people running around to get you a glass of water. And for such men to then rub shoulders with women who are self-confident and do not think of themselves as any less than other women or other men, I think it is the men who have a lot of adjusting to do, And that education begins at home. Cannot blame the office, cannot blame the school, cannot blame society, because there is a mini society in every home. And if the mothers discriminate between their daughters and sons, or if mothers-in-law discriminate between, the son and the daughter-in-law. Uh, yeah, the men are not going to get the right message, or the women themselves or the mothers themselves continue to be victims of the older men in the family. Again, that's a bad example for boys to follow. I mean, for example, if a boy, I have I mean, a maid is not a politically correct word, but I have a lady who comes to work in my house, and her husband beats her up, and she's got two children, a son and a daughter. And I tell her that if you don't want to go to the police for yourself, please go for the sake of your children, because your son is also going to grow up to be a wife beater. And if your son-in-law beats up your daughter, she's going to think that it's absolutely okay, because she's seeing her mom being beaten up every day, and she's not doing anything. So unless there's change that happens in every family, change outside will not happen. Okay, so this is a question that I get asked a lot. How was it being a woman? And what did you do as a woman in the corporate world? Now, the thing is that I never looked at myself as a woman. I was just another professional in the workplace. And because we were so few of us, it almost became natural for me to be the only woman in a room full of suits. And so to me, it wasn't abnormal to be surrounded by men at the workplace. But what I did do, and I don't think it was something that people taught me, I think that was my inherent self. Though I didn't think of myself as a woman when it came to work, I did not behave like a man when it came to work. I was a woman. I was proud of a woman. I did not think of myself as any less or more than my other co-workers. But I would dress in colorful clothes, earlier saris or salwar kameez with jewelry, with makeup, and it did not take away from who I was or or the work that I did. What I find today is women, especially at the entry stage in the corporate world, especially women who come from good MBA schools, they're dressing more like men. And I want to tell them that you don't have to do that. And I'll give you a small example. When we went for interviews, when we were getting recruited, we all wore colorful saris. I mean, the women, of course. And it was the norm. But today, when I was working and we used to go for campus interviews, or we used to have people come for interviews, all the women would wear business suits. And I felt like telling them, why are you conforming to the dress code? This is not a dress code that has been set by anybody. And nobody is going to take you any less if you wear a colorful sari for your interview. So inherently, and I'm jumping to your last bit, a message to the younger generation is, do not be afraid to be who you are. Do not see your gender as a disadvantage, but do not use your gender as an excuse to not to do things. So be confident of who you are, be confident, be comfortable in who you are. Do not think of yourself as any less or any more than your co-workers, but do not conform for the sake of blending in. As a woman, you will stand out no matter where you are, because again, 50% of the workforce is not women. Women are, a much smaller percentage of the workforce. So no matter where you are, you will stand out. So do not be afraid of standing out. Do not conform for the sake of blending in. Right? So again, to go back to what I did, I had fun all through my career. There were sexist bosses, there were obnoxious people, there were people who would bitch about me, I am sure, and other women. But that's all part of life. I mean, if a leader is concerned about all of this, then he or she is not going to rise further. As a business leader, while it is good to be loved and respected, you also have to be comfortable being hated, because if you take decisions that are popular, you cannot be an effective leader. And if you are an effective leader, there are bound to be people who will hate you. So unless you are comfortable being hated, you cannot be a good leader.